Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Appreciate you all joining here today. Just a few housekeeping items here. I would ask that all of the panelists keep your video on. Everybody else, if you could, maybe just turn your video off. We are going to, again, that'll promote all of our speakers to the top for everybody. We are recording this. This is going to be shared via social media and on our website. So just want to give everybody a heads up there as well. Again, this is the second of a series of what we're calling a Comeback Cumberland County economy. And this one is targeted towards professional services and commercial office space. It's going to be a pretty broad discussion talking about the impacts on COVID, return to work, what that looks like, the impacts of office space maybe remaining vacant and having to potentially be reused, repurposed, and so forth. So my name is Jamie Keener. I'm the CEO for Cumberland Area Economic Development Corporation. And with me today are real estate broker Art Campbell, Campbell Commercial Real Estate, John Rapula, the Managing Director for Deloitte, John V. Thomas, Commissioner for Hampton Township, and Kirk Stoner, the Planning Director for Cumberland County. Thank you all for joining me today. Anxious to have a discussion around this topic, and I'm going to start off real quick talking about a recent announcement by Rite Aid yesterday. I had the opportunity to interview with CBS to talk about the impact of Rite Aid leaving South Central PA and moving their corporate headquarters to Philadelphia. Still yet to fully understand what that impact is. They talk about their corporate headquarters moving there, but they have, I think it's 2,800 employees that are corporate employees that are going to have a remote first opportunity. So, I anticipate that they still may be residing in Cumberland County or whatever county they're currently residing in, and then having these collaboration spaces, as they've mentioned, in Philadelphia and a couple in South Central PA. So still haven't fully understood what that impact's going to be on our local economy. But if those workers stay here, they're gonna reside, they're gonna have be spending money on their goods and services locally. So the economic impact may not be as significant as one might think. So with that, I'm going to ask each of our panelists to just give a little discussion about your business and what you do in support of office space or professional services. And we're going to start with Art. Would you please talk about Campbell Commercial and what you do?
Sure. Well, we've been here 37 years doing brokerage business. The office is a very large component of what we do, both the leasing and the sales of investment properties. Do some other things. Thank God everybody stopped asking me about Trader Joe's and they could finally allowed to announce that they were coming here. But so from the office space, I don't know how much you want me to get into that yet, or just the background of what we do.
Background of what you do, and then we'll get into the discussion here.
Okay, so as I said, in 37 years we've represented a lot of the largest companies here. Though didn't do the most recent Deloitte, but have leased over 200,000 square feet to Deloitte over the years. We've represented Blue Cross, both sold and leased, done recent medical leasing as one of the newer buildings on Good Hope Road with UPMC Pinnacle and Jones Daly. So just sold a medical building in Chambersburg last week, and probably one of the bigger transactions was West Shore Home, sold, and they remodeled 55,000 square feet in Hampton Township for their corporate headquarters, which they're one of the few stories that they're quickly outgrowing that office already with 250 employees in there and 55,000 square feet. But I can delve more into maybe some specifics of what's available and why.
Yes, yeah, we'll get to that. Thank you. John, talk about Deloitte, if you would, please.
Sure. Thanks, Jamie. Good morning, everyone. John Rapilla, I'm a managing director at the firm. I've been here 21 years. Most of that time has been in our Harrisburg office. I grew up down in Lidditz, for those of you who know the area. Our business is largely management consulting. Here within Central PA, we have 3 offices, more or less. We have a downtown office, which is in Strawberry Square, 1 floor in a building there, where we have about 200 people assigned. We have a large facility out in Mechanicsburg, where we probably have close to 1,000 people assigned, and in a small footprint in Camp Hill, where I live. Our business is largely, as I mentioned, management consulting, but we have an interesting business model in that we have a lot of people who work out on client sites. We have some folks who work on site in our offices. We also have folks who travel, like me, to client sites. So we've had to, Jamie, I know we've had to grapple with a myriad of issues during COVID, given that unique nature of our workforce, our local workforce.
Very good. Thanks, John. John Thomas, tell us a little bit about Hampton Township and maybe some of the office space that you have there.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, Hampton Township, South Central Pennsylvania. We're the largest municipality in Cumberland County and the 3rd largest in Central Pennsylvania after Lower Paxton Township in the city of Harrisburg. So our nighttime population is large, but so is our daytime population. We're probably one of the larger daytime populations also in Central Pennsylvania. A lot of that is office, but there's also some significant warehousing and so on that goes on here because of the interstate system. We have a technology park which attracts a lot of office space, and that's not completely done yet. There's room there for more, at least under the current zoning. We've tried to anticipate some of the situations and have changed some of our ordinances. We can get into that a bit later.
Okay, thank you, John. And Kirk? See, Kirk's having audio difficulty here. You able to get your audio up, Kirk? All right, we'll move on. Kirk is the planning director for Cumberland County, and hopefully he can get his mic figured out, and we'll get him back. So I'm going to ask a few questions here. How has COVID impacted the office market? And maybe I'll start with Art. The office market really, I think people were starting to transition back over the summer. I know even our office, we had talked about coming back after Labor Day, more on a hybrid basis. But what are you seeing right now, or what are you hearing about lease issues and businesses not necessarily wanting to come back or not renewing their leases?
Well, you're right. I mean, at first, everybody was kind of a wait and see. There was a complete shutdown for a while. And then the transition back to the office, it was clearly the smaller the company, the faster they were going back in. Small independent firms, they were pretty much in the office pretty quickly, within a month or 2, I would say, of the shutdown. It seemed the larger the firm, the state never fully came back. Their plans, you kept hearing about September. And now, and I've talked to other brokers at JLL and Cushman and what they're seeing, not just here, but nationally. And we went from, we will be back in the fall, to after the first of the year, to we have no clue what we're doing. A large engineering firm told me recently that, they really had to up their hiring, put full-time people on just to hire people, and the responses that they're getting. And I'm not talking about, and one of the frustrations that I have is that the press seems to focus on, bars and restaurants and their employment problems. But this person told me that his recruiters are hearing, if you can't guarantee me that I will not have to come back into the office full time at any time in the future, I'm not interested in the job with your firm, that I have to have flex time. And I think we've gone from how long are we shut down to when we back in the office, till employees saying, you're going to have to work on my schedule and I'm going to be at least flex time. We went from starting this, that some of the large companies were saying, when we go back, we're not going to be as tight on the work tables and cubes and everything as we've been over the years. Some of you have heard me say that when I started in the business, you were putting 4 people in 1,000 square feet. I think John might back me up. When Deloitte moved to their new place, the requirement was they could put 10 people in 1,000 square feet, and they had to have the parking to accommodate that. I don't know what they're doing, but I can tell you that, you know, some of the other large firms that I had were down to 140 square feet per employee. They were then saying, when we come back, we're going to have larger offices or larger cubes. We're going to separate people more. Now they don't know what they're doing. If there's one area that's good, is probably the office equipment or furniture dealers, because every time something changes, it changes and people are ordering different stuff. Though right now, if you want some used office furniture, it's pretty cheap because people are leaving it in place. The most common thing we're hearing right now is we want out of our lease, we want to downsize our lease, and we're trying to figure it out. I mean, we met with an association the other day. You know, they have 17 people left in 12,000 square feet. So the Blues, I think if you talk to them, you know, they're really not sure, but they know. And I'm seeing this with insurance companies, probably more than anything. Both, you know, property and casualty, health insurance, they're saying, we've figured out that we can have our claims people especially work from home. And we're never going back to the amount of space that we had. One company did tell me, though, because I asked about how are you training people and how are you developing a culture? Because you hear about, you know, that's been a big thing with a lot of companies, is, you know, want to develop a culture. He said, well, that's a problem because we're trying to train people. We're providing laptops for the training. Only half the people are getting through the training and they won't give the laptops back. So, you know, I think the verdict's out, and accept the idea that we started with, that how long will it be till people are back in the office, I'm saying has gone out the window. And now they're trying to figure out what are our needs in the future. And the needs aren't going to be anywhere close to what we have. We just did an analysis for a company, and just East Shore properties, just larger properties, we came up with 28 buildings on the East Shore of Harrisburg, not going out as far as Hershey. Those 28 buildings had 800,000 square feet of available office space. Wow. So what's that take? Thousands of jobs to fill that office space. And that's not including people that have told us they're downsizing. We're not talking 18 months or 2 years to figure this out. It's going to be years for the filling of office space. Having said that, medical office space that's new, we're signing long-term leases of demand, but the catch-all of medical office space, used medical office space, is potentially less valuable than normal office because of the cost of remodeling. I've probably gone on long enough, Jamie.
Yeah, no, that's great intel, and appreciate that coming from the brokerage side. John, how about from you know, the office manager side? What are you seeing? And I thought it was interesting. You talked about you have your on-site employees, but then you're also sending people off-site, and then you're having to figure out what are those requirements in those other offices that you're actually consulting on. If you could touch base on that.
Sure, Jamie. So one thing with us, you know, one thing to keep in mind is we are a multinational firm. So a lot of our guidance comes down from our national office, which sits up in New York City. But locally, we do have multiple types of folks. We are primarily a client service business. I serve government clients. And, I think Art, we've seen a lot of what Art has talked about, with our clients, right? Initially, our government clients, we're like, we don't want anybody on site, but not only that, like, we need to stop whatever work we're doing with you right now, because what they found was, even in addition to kind of the real estate challenges, right, not wanting people on site, is they didn't have a remote workforce, right? Most of the state folks that we were dealing with were not set up to do remote work, whether that's tunneling into networks, whether it being in areas where they have broadband. This rural broadband becomes a big issue at some point with remote, workforce. So we kind of were asked to hit pause on a number of our projects, and we didn't have our folks coming into the office. They were working remote. Now, within the firm, because we're a national firm, we tend to convene a lot of remote teams, a lot of national teams. So our connectivity was fine, but we did switch to pretty much entire remote. We're now moving more toward a hybrid model. The phrase is really together when it matters. I think to Art's point, I don't envision that we're ever going to go back to. Art probably remembers the days when we had 6 floors off Erford Road when it was full every day. Those days are gone. I think I echo what Art said. We've got 1 floor in Strawberry Square in downtown, and I'd be surprised going forward if we have more than 20 people on site. I go there a couple of days a week just because we have a lot of home renovations going on this summer. And I'm usually one of like 2 to 3 people in the office. I think the other thing Art mentioned is really important, is with talent and talent acquisition. The days of requiring, if we used to say, if you're not out serving a client, we want you in the office at least 4 days a week, Friday work from home. The days of a mandate like that are gone. I absolutely are. The same thing, right? When you're trying to recruit talent, they are really comfortable, particularly younger folks, right? Working from home, working from their parents' beach home, or getting, Airbnbs and co-locating together, with some of their college roommates. So I think that some of the changes COVID brought on are really going to have profound impacts on how we recruit and retain talent, for sure. I've kind of rambled there, but I'll stop, Jamie, so that others can speak.
Yeah, it's interesting, John. I had a conversation with your colleague, Chad Firestone, yesterday, and similar conversation about recruiting, and really the employees are in control now with demands on remote work and the flexibility. So it's if not, they're going to go somewhere else, and it's just back and forth to whoever's going to give them what they want. So certainly going to be a labor challenge.
Yeah, and kind of echoing one of the things Art was getting to was for me, it's culture. I was one who grew up in the firm, being in the office. I'm actually still more productive when I'm in the office than when I'm at home. But what in my new role, which is really about small percentage of my time as the office manager director, I worry about culture. Like, how do you develop, foster a culture when you don't have folks in the office co-locating? So I think culture is another issue, even separate and apart from talent. How do you foster a culture? And I think great cultures tend to keep great teams together, right? Weak cultures, you don't feel as much part of something, and I think you're more likely to just kind of become a free agent, if you will, right, and move on to the next opportunity.
Yeah, and I think that's most impacted when you have new employees that you're trying to bring in. They have no idea what that culture is, and if you're not in the office, they're not going to understand it. Those that have been there for years certainly will, but new employees, it's going to be and training. That's another thing is, how do you do the training that you need to do with new employees to get them up to speed on, not only, the professional tasks or whatever those tasks are, but how specifically a certain company does those tasks. So, can it be done via Zoom or Teams or whatever that is? Possibly, but I don't think it's going to be as effective. So I'm going to change gears here a little bit. John Thomas, Art talked about what 800,000 square feet of office space currently sitting vacant on the East Shore. Hopefully that's not the same amount on the West Shore, but if it is, what do you see potential impacts? We talked earlier about the local services tax impacts and what that might look like. If those buildings are sitting vacant, what are the property tax implications, not only to the township, but also to the county? Where do you see that going?
Okay, Jamie. Art, you say it's also on the West Shore, but I don't have the numbers about like the impact on our Hampton Township. I don't know if you have anything on that specifically.
Not specifically to the township, no.
Okay, thanks. On the LST, that's the local services tax. I think there'll have to be a discussion at the state level about how to handle that. The objective of that tax was to put some income into the municipalities where people are working, because the way they do taxing in Pennsylvania, the income tax that you pay goes to the municipality that you live in. So for instance, take Harrisburg, where a significant amount of their income comes from the local services tax, because they have a larger daytime population than they have a nighttime population. So the money that they get from the local services tax is very important to the city. It's also important to Hampton Township because, as I said, we're one of the larger daytime populations in central Pennsylvania. So now, if people are not going to work, the objective of that tax was to offset some of the costs of people going to work. That is for your streets, your fire companies, your EMTs, those types of services that they need, that they demand, that they're not paying for in any other way than the real estate tax or the LST. So if you have a business in Hampton Township, you're paying the owner of the building land is paying a real estate tax, and the employees are paying $10 a week. I think that's what it works out to, is $50 a year, of which $47 goes to the municipality and $5 goes to the school district. So if the state doesn't change that, then people can work at home and they're still paying to the place where they're not going to work. So if somebody lives in Hampton Township, for instance, and works in Harrisburg, right now the local services tax is being paid to the city of Harrisburg, and they're not going there. So at some point in time, if this thing drags on, I think everybody's going to recognize that something has to be done. There has to be a change to that tax. So, but again, it's a state level, and the municipalities that are impacted more by it aren't necessarily in central Pennsylvania. Take it out Harrisburg, especially when you get down around Philadelphia area, where the municipalities have to deal with what they call the Sterling Act. The municipalities out in the suburbs of Delaware County and Montgomery County, anybody that works in the city, their income tax goes to the city, not to that local municipality. So they're counting on the real estate tax and some of these other forms of income to pay their bills. So it's a statewide issue, and I think they're going to probably have to address it at some point, depending on how long this thing drags out.
So yeah, switching over to the property tax, if those office buildings sit vacant for a period of years, do you anticipate that they would potentially challenge the assessment and potentially or decrease the amount of tax revenue that you might see? And do you think municipalities, including Hampton Township, would be receptive to potential change in use or repositioning those buildings to another use, say a mixed use like commercial on the first floor and condos or apartments on upper floors?
Yeah, Jamie, I think that's a good point. The impact of of less office demand has to be addressed by local governments, and they can do that through their ordinances. So for instance, right now in Hampton Township, we did provide the whole southern part of the township basically can be mixed use right now, where you can have just what you said, office or retail on the first floor and residential use on the second, third, fourth, fifth floor, or some combination thereof. So right now in our southern part, which is basically the Carlisle Pike, Trindle Road, and Simpson Ferry, that part of the township and all the side streets in between, we've set up as a mixed use district. The rest of the southern part of the township is pretty much warehousing. So that probably has not been impacted as much because you can't really do warehousing remotely. It's
Right.
hands-on type work. Now in our technology part, that's quite a bit different. We're going to have to deal with there's about 100 acres left. It's undeveloped in that part of the technology park, and we're not seeing a lot of demand. That hasn't moved obviously in this period. So it may be that the people that own the land or want to own the land will be in to address the board about the zoning, and we'll have to probably face up to some kind of a change under the circumstances. But that's a bridge to be crossed when somebody comes in and makes a proposal. And the Hampton commissioners, I think, will appropriately address the issue when it comes up. I can't imagine that that time will not come where somebody is going to have to say, what are we doing about office zoning? And it's not just the zoning itself, it's also parking. Art brought up and John brought up less demand. Well, how do you do that when you're saying there's going to be X number of square feet of office space, and if you don't provide parking for what the potential is, then where are people going to park if we ever go back to any sort of norm? And maybe we'll never go back to any sort of norm. That's the kind of thing that I think that the business community is going to have to address, and then go to their local governments and say, this is what the future is. And none of us want to have impervious surface where it's not needed.
Sure.
It doesn't do any good for the ecology or anything else.
Yeah. So just tying into that, it's not Hampton Township, but I think of Ross Moyne Business Park, and there's quite a few office buildings there. There's some restaurants, and there's some personal services. So really, that has created sort of a mixed use commercial space. But imagine if some of the office buildings sit vacant there for a while, and those offices then were converted to condominiums or apartments. Then you would have a full mixed use with live, work, play type of development. So we're often trying to create these mixed use developments. Here's an opportunity to repurpose potentially some office space in an existing business park. Kirk, what are your thoughts on the issues of office space, and from a county planning perspective, what do you see going forward, and how do you think municipalities could modify ordinances to be more flexible and allow office space?
Sure. Jamie, just a couple quick points though on county assessment and everything. I did talk to our assessors yesterday just in preparation for this. So I think, when you're looking at office space and everything and its impact from a property tax perspective, you're looking at the market value of the property, and how has COVID then impacted the market value of these properties? Has it impacted it to a point where a real estate appeal would be warranted, and then you'd see a new potentially downward assessment on those properties? So the folks I talked to yesterday said that the period for appeals closed on September 1st. They had 22 commercial appeals last year, so indicated that was relatively low. I had low appeals residential on the residential side as well last year, given the hot residential market, meaning that isn't an issue right now. But as we talked to them a little bit more, getting input, with that market value piece, it felt like probably the older commercial space, the older office spaces, maybe not in the more desirable locations, would have more of a susceptibility to that market value impact and maybe more likely to come in for appeals. So I think it's something they're watching. Clearly we're watching from the county because it could have an impact on our tax revenue to provide our services. But when you look at it from the bigger picture, if you're a property owner, what do you want? You want a successful property that's out there that's being leased or being sold. And I think the best way to do that then is flexibility, to make sure that whatever goes into that property, there's a variety of uses that go in there. So you're not really hamstrung to just commercial office. And then we have COVID hit, no one's there. And then you're wondering what to do with some of these expensive buildings. So I think as much as we can, we're working with our municipalities here. A lot of the zoning ordinances we're helping to rewrite. We've been trying to incentivize and explain the whole option of flexibility, that it's okay to have flexibility. You don't need, commercial office here and commercial service over here. It's okay to mix them. It's okay to put light industrial in there. In some cases, it could be okay to put residential in some of these areas. I know some of the existing office spaces out there with the floor plate size and everything for some of the office, but it's difficult to do that. In some cases, it may be more expensive to try and adaptively reuse an office than it is to go out and build new residential somewhere else. But I think flexibility is the key. When you look at where these office complexes are located, they're already located in growth areas. They're close to transportation. They have basic infrastructure in place. They have adequate parking. In many cases, they have too much parking. So there could be opportunities to really take a look then, John was mentioning earlier, parking, it's wasted space in many cases. You go out and look around now. I mean, it's just, I guess as a planner, one of the things I do when I'm driving around, I look and see all these vacant spaces and think no one has ever parked in that. Yet someone had to pay to build it. Yet someone has to pay a stormwater fee on that space. It starts to make no sense. And I think the what if scenario of, well, what if something in the future happens, then there's nowhere to park? Well, I haven't seen that what if play out a lot. It has it? Yeah, sure it has. But I think as we move ahead, we need to look at parking as part of this too. If there's unused areas, I'm thinking in South Middleton Township, there have been some proposals that we're looking at the Walnut Bottom Road corridor for the former Kmart facility. Are there opportunities to do residential apartments in the old parking lot, because we know we don't need the parking lot anymore? So again, I think it's flexibility, it's creativity of looking at our ordinances to make sure that we're not really hamstringing a developer and saying, this is the one use that you can do. And if that use isn't in demand, tough. I think when we get to that situation, we'll see real estate assessment appeals. We'll continue to see vacant buildings. And I'm not sure that's in the best interest of the private sector or the public sector.
I appreciate that, Kirk. A lot of good information. And yeah, the assessment issue, I think has yet to really be born, because, my understanding is that, and maybe Art, you can help me out here, that revenue plays into commercial assessments. It's not just the property value, but if they're impacted in the long term by revenue, there might be more appeals coming forth.
Yeah, I think when I've talked to the assessment offices, they've been surprised that they've not had more appeals, and I think that's unsophisticated owners of the properties. The funny example I give is that I've appealed the taxes for municipalities and school districts on their own properties when they wanted to sell, because they weren't paying the taxes and they never paid attention to what their properties were assessed for. I had one school district where I appealed their taxes. Of course, they had to recuse themselves from opinion on that, but it was reduced a couple of $1 million so that I could sell the property, because the property was unsaleable. Because the day that somebody bought it, they were paying the taxes at a highly inflated amount. So, we only handle appeals for clients that we have. We don't do it, as a fee-based thing. But as people are having more issues with the profitability of their buildings, they're looking harder at their utilities and their taxes and their insurance, taxes being one of the main things. The stormwater fees couldn't have hit at a worse time that the municipalities are instituting, because now when you're having trouble with the profitability of your buildings, you just had this fee added, which I can never talk about it without saying they called it a fee, not a tax, so that everybody would have to pay it, including churches and nonprofits, schools. So I do think you're going to see much more on the appeals. We look at that anytime we even get a call about somebody looking to do something, even if it's leasing their building, we look at it. And I'd say 30% of the time, it's our feeling that the property is overassessed. And some of the larger entities, they just don't look at it. You know, banks don't look at it. Large insurance companies don't look at it because they figure it's such a small portion of, but especially as these buildings come up from sale, a buyer's definitely going to look at it. The adaptive reuse, you know, I hear people talking about this, and with the zoning, you know, my mantra in real estate has always been, you have to have an exit strategy. You don't build a building without knowing, or occupy it without knowing how you're getting out of it. And that's the problem. Kurt mentioned a little bit, and I think Jamie, you did, about you can't necessarily convert these office buildings to another use because of the way they were designed. And too often I've seen people design buildings for themselves, especially because they think they're never leaving the building. And when they're leaving, nobody else wants it because of the way it was designed. So it, you know, talked about, for example, in Ross Point with Members First, you know, moving out of there. Actually, there's probably office space that'll go back to flex space. This demand across the country, small flex space, which is an office with a warehouse component. We're assisting West Shore in 12 different states. We've done stuff, and every time I talk to a broker in a different state, whether it's Texas or Florida or whatever, they say, you know, your need here is really, really tough to find. And 2 weeks ago, I was talking to a broker in Richmond, Virginia, and I said, so I know this is tough to find. What if I needed office space? He said, if you needed office space in Richmond right now, you sign a 5-year deal, you'll get 1 year of free rent. But it's hard to find the flex space. So the adaptive reuse sometimes is demolition. You know, in this area, the best example was the Senate Plaza building. We have helped with the Bonton project. So it's not just how do we reuse this building. A lot of times it's knock it down and start over again. Also, you know, you're seeing in markets when you talk about this, you know, a place to live, work, and play. You've seen these developments that are pretty good size. The Charter Homes, for example, has done. They've worked, but there's no real demand for the office space, and I think they have found that. Because you may not want to hear, but the small offices that are renting are still, you know, let's see, tattoo parlors, massage, you know, that's who calls on those places. There's not a lot of entrepreneurial starting businesses right now, and if they are, you know, they're starting from home. Last thing I touch on was talked about the parking. It's interesting. The ordinances in the parking typically are requiring less parking spaces than the firms want. I mentioned about how, and maybe John can back me up, that, you know, the firms were putting more and more people in smaller space. And the buildings themselves, a lot of buildings, when we had clients looking at them, the buildings didn't work because there wasn't enough parking. How that changes, I don't know, but parking is a big issue, but I wouldn't say it's an issue because the existing buildings have too much. As a matter of fact, most of the older buildings only required 4 parking spaces per usable square foot. Really didn't have enough parking. And sometimes they were relined or somebody had to buy more parking for that. Definitely not enough for call centers. So,
yeah. So John Rapula, again, you guys have a couple buildings sitting over there on 114. You know, what are your thoughts? Where are you headed with that? Any ideas on what the future holds?
Yeah, I'd hate to pull out the crystal ball, but the Urban Mechanicsburg, one of my colleagues runs that operation, but we've already consolidated into one of the buildings, right? We used to have some space in 2. We have a team now basically in the building we started with. Downtown, I think the firm is looking at our entire footprint, you know, nationwide. Downtown has, in my personal view, has a lot of benefits in addition to number of folks. We are right there by one of our main clients, which is, you know, Pennsylvania state government. So I would expect us to have some presence downtown. It was great when we moved from the Orford Road property downtown. Not so much paying for parking. Parking seems to be a theme here, but parking downtown is crazy. I worry about that Walnut Street garage where I park, which is now, on a daily basis, probably 30% full, if that. Art, I echo your comments about the old days when we were on Erfurt Road. Parking was a real challenge for us. Now, lucky that's a large complex, and we could park over by IBM or somebody else, but nobody wants to walk 3 blocks to work in the rain. We had folks who were renting apartments in that, it's not new anymore, but that apartment complex on the other side of Erfurt there. And one, for fitness reasons, they'd walk, but we had other people who live in Camp Hill who thought about walking to work because parking when at full capacity was a real challenge over there. But I would expect, Jamie, that we'll keep something downtown. I think you raised a good question about Mechanicsburg, because we have a lot of technology folks there who are very productive working outside of that building. And we did put a lot of bodies in that building, to Art's point. Whenever I go over there, I would just feel amazed at how many people were in that facility. I was at the peak, felt like I was swimming through bodies. I couldn't get a workspace, and I'm a partner in the firm. I had a hard time finding a workspace there. That's the one I think we all, should keep an eye on, because I think the nature of the changing of the workforce, the fact that these folks are remote, I wonder what the future holds there. But I would hope, again, that we keep some footprint downtown. It's been great for us downtown.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up about transportation. I wanted to ask Kirk, he mentioned it briefly, and the office buildings that we do have are in growth areas, and mass transit has been an issue for Cumberland County, just trying to get the critical mass to be able to make it efficient and effective. There again, if we put residential units in these office parks, again, to Art's point, maybe we do need to tear down some buildings and put up some residential apartment buildings or condos. But do you see that as a benefit, the walkability opportunities going forward, Kirk?
Sure. I mean, anytime that, folks could live potentially close to work, I think that's a benefit. From the public transit standpoint, though, I think if we do redevelop, we want to redevelop smartly. If we're wiping the slate clean, building new buildings, design them so that they are fit for transit. Because, with a lot of the older designs we've talked about before, maybe that transit was an afterthought. So we see a parking lots, it's not really accessible by bus. So as we move ahead, I think if we see changes and we see apartment complexes, making sure that we have the right non-motorized connections to them, making sure that there's opportunities to be served by public transit. And even some of the new public transit solutions we're looking at, the historical model, sending a bus out, sending it back, we're working on that. And it still works in some places, but there's some micro transit opportunities out there, which is kind of a blend of public transit and then some sort of ride sharing model where you're signing up on an app within a defined geographic area, put in where you want to go, rides there in 10 minutes and takes you to that. I know I'm on the board of the Central Pennsylvania Transit Authority, and that's one of the issues we've had down in York area. We've had 2 micro transit applications that have been launched, and those micro transit applications were the only transit services that increased in ridership throughout the pandemic. So we saw fixed route. We also saw our shared ride services decrease in ridership. That micro transit application increase. So unique situations like that, if we're seeing new trends of land use from commercial to residential, or it's out there, we can respond a lot more quickly, a lot more nimbly with micro transit than we ever could trying to redistribute our existing fixed route systems.
So John Thomas, I hear you offering to take a look at parking requirements in Hampden Township. But I think across the board we need to be taking a look at that. Shared parking. If we have opportunities to do that as well. And I think to Art's point, the density within these office buildings is likely to change going forward. From shoehorning as many in as you can to trying to give them a little space now. So I think certainly parking is something we need to take a look at. And again, it reduces the amount of impervious surface. Katie's new strategic plan talks about a healthy economic development ecosystem, which, includes looking at the environment. We are a great place to live, work, and play and learn. So we want to continue to be cognizant of the environmental impacts of, stormwater and again, the heat effects of paving and so forth. So, John, anything else you want to add there?
Yeah, on the area where we've set up in the township for mixed use, some of the things that we've run into, it's starting. There are a couple of projects in that area that have begun, and some of the things that we found, the parking requirements for residential and offices can be addressed, and I don't think there's a problem with that. One of the things, though, if you want to have a pedestrian-friendly area, you got to have sidewalks. And when you're going into an area that was developed 50, 60, 70 years ago, Carlisle Pike, Trindle Road, Simpson Ferry, particularly, there's no sidewalks. And trying to get the owners of all the properties to put in sidewalks so that people can safely use a pedestrian-friendly area has been difficult. People don't want to spend the money. Even the physicality. Where do you put the sidewalk in some of these properties? They're not real deep, and I think other municipalities that try to do this are going to run into that kind of an issue. If you're going to have a residential mixed use, you got to be able to have the residents be able to get from property to property, so that if they want to go, say, to a grocery store that's down the street, you don't want them walking out on the main road. It doesn't work that way. So you have to address a simple thing like, how do you get people with a trail, a sidewalk, or something from property to property if you're going to do that. As far as the tax implications of doing this, the Hampton approach has not been the focus on the real estate tax. I think everybody knows that. The Hampton tax is $1 million property pays us $156 a year. So we don't use the income, the real estate tax, as a source of income to do the services that we have. So we're not going to worry too much about whether there's reassessments or things like that in Hampton. But other municipalities, that's not true. The reassessments, if that happens, are going to have a significant impact on some municipalities. So I think on a statewide basis, you might see some legislation that addresses that issue as we go forward.
Yeah, I'll throw out there. I know, and Art I think mentioned it. The cost to repurpose some of these buildings is sometimes more than just tearing them down and rebuilding. So one of the things I know is we're looking at redevelopment, and the overlay in Hampton Township comes into play. There's requirements for sidewalks, and they might be doing a couple hundred feet of sidewalk, which adds to that additional cost of redevelopment. So while I understand you don't use the taxes to be able to provide those improvements, it also might deter future development if some of those funds don't go towards those public improvements. So just something to think about going forward. I know you're trying to encourage redevelopment in the older part of the township. So, and it's I think some of the property owners are gonna balk at putting those improvements in. So.
Well, John or Jamie, that's one of the problems is, you've got the best concepts that don't always transfer into the particular property. I agree, John, when it's necessary that the walkability is important, but the ordinances tend to encompass everything. And, I dealt with a property on the Carlisle Pike where you have to cross 6 lanes of traffic, and the amount of money spent into sidewalks and handicapped accessibility to those sidewalks, where no one in the right mind would ever walk across, let alone, try to use a wheelchair to go across there. So the ordinance required it. It's put in at considerable cost, but it's almost like sometimes common sense isn't there. I had a property owned by a municipality that somebody wanted to buy the property, it was probably acceptable. But they had to put a sidewalk really up the side of a hill, which created a slope that and just the development of the property didn't work. And they then said, well, maybe we'd forgive this sidewalk if you give us a contribution to put something somewhere else. But it still is a cost to develop the property that it ended up killing the deal. The township never did sell the property. So there's great ideas and concepts. Unfortunately, they often don't transfer to every single property that's out there. And it's a problem for municipalities. You know, I mean, Lemoyne, Wormleysburg, Lemoyne, and Camp Hill had at one time one company redo their ordinances. And it's such that I had people in Lemoyne wanted to buy a building in Lemoyne that was an office building. And I went into the borough and they said, well, you can't use that building because you don't have the off-street parking that the ordinance requires. So they basically took every building in downtown Lemoyne that was an office and said, no one can use it as an office because we don't have the parking that we just put in our ordinance.
Yeah, and I'm looking in the chat here. Chris had put a note and asked about municipality instituting a fee in lieu of sidewalks. And I was just looking, the MTF, Multimodal Transportation Fund, is open for PennDOT. And, you know, one of those things is that looking at pedestrian opportunities, and maybe there is a way to institute this fee in lieu of to get, you know, the required 30% local match to be able to do, you know, a project that includes, you know, extending sidewalk, you know, in front of an area that you would like to see redeveloped. So I know we're getting outside of, you know, the commercial topic, but
Right.
I think if we are looking at commercial office and potential repurposing, those additional costs could be burdensome to the redevelopment. So Kirk or John, do you want to have any comments about the fee in lieu of?
Any fee, you know, any fee on a project like that could be a disincentive.
Right.
There are a few municipalities that I don't recall the names. I have seen the fee in lieu of sidewalks, but then you get down to a fairness issue too. If you're developing a property that doesn't have sidewalks and you're paying for sidewalks in another area, is that fair to you? Is the benefit to your property? So there are issues with that. In some cases, you know, we keep talking about wiping the slate clean. There may be some areas that are too far gone, that it doesn't make sense to try and, you know, redevelopment in any certain way, but there are other areas that aren't. And I think in those areas where we're seeing new construction or you know, linking into existing development, that we can make a difference. And in those areas, it would make sense then. So we have more of a comprehensive, you know, non-motorized transportation system.
Yeah, from the municipality's point of view, I know I'll speak from the Hampton point of view. Other municipalities obviously might address it differently. We would have no objection to Kirk or the business community, say somebody like Jamie Keener, or the Chamber of Commerce, or the Builders Association, or some other group like that, making a presentation to address some of these concerns as we move forward. In other words, if there's going to be a significant change that's permanent that we're talking about, there might be the need to have some new verbiage in our ordinances. And I think the municipalities will need some help and some wording in from a proposal from the groups that are directly affected. For instance, years ago, Hampton was about to pass a new building code, and we had a text done, we're ready to go. And so what we did was we sent it over to the Builders Association, and the Builders Association jumped at the opportunity of addressing it. And they actually hired somebody, a planner, to look at the proposed change to the ordinance. And they came in and made a presentation, and the commissioners at that time accepted their proposal to make some significant changes. And they didn't ask to loosen the ordinance, they asked actually to tighten it up, because the Builders Association didn't want to have in Hampton Township, for instance, non-stick homes, if you know what I mean. In other words, they didn't want packaged housing. So they took that part out of it to make the housing requirements more stringent than what the ordinance would have required. So I don't think that at least from the Hampton point of view, we'd be adverse to having proposals brought to us to modify our ordinances with COVID in mind and some of the changes that need to be done. But I think it has to be a cooperative effort between. I know Kirk down at the county has always been good working with Hampton, but also with some of the associations, and that's as opposed to say some individual walking in and saying you ought to change your ordinance.
Sure.
I really think there needs to be a lot of thought, and the way the Builders Association did at that time by hiring a planner helped a lot. And then the planner came in and made some really good proposals. So I think that might be an approach that Hampton would try, and then other municipalities might want to follow.
Yeah, appreciate that, John. And that's one of the things, having these discussions helps us to identify opportunities to make improvements. And, Kirk and I have been writing ordinances for years and assisting with things for years. And, as soon as you write one, there's an opportunity for somebody to challenge it. And, oftentimes things need to be changed. So, certainly appreciate that offer. And we will be talking to some of those associations and, maybe coming to not only Hampton, but I think, if we look at things on a countywide basis to, continue to provide economic opportunity and, try to reduce cost as much as possible while still maintaining our quality of life. Certainly, we would like to do that. So with that, we have about 3 minutes left. I'm going to ask each of you to maybe close up with a minute, just some final thoughts, if you would. We'll start with John Rapula.
All right. Well, I thanks again for the opportunity today. I think that throughout the day, I see Art and I have really had very similar experiences about footprint. And Art, thanks for your help. I know I didn't work with you on the Deloitte perspective, but I understand you've worked with us in the past. Appreciate that. I'd say if any folks are sort of working through any challenges with return to work or so forth, myself and my colleagues, certainly happy to share our perspectives and our experience as well with anybody locally. So again, thanks for the opportunity today.
Yep, thank you. Art.
Yeah, same thing. I appreciate the opportunity. Obviously, it's a business that I've been passionate about for 45 years. And, I too, anything can help. If there was only one area when you talked about the adaptive reuse that I was thinking of is people may not realize that one of the things we talked about parking and layout, but part of the cost come from new requirements of roof insulation, outside air being brought into buildings, and that impacts it as much as everything else. Is that sometimes it's hard to reuse these buildings to meet statewide building codes, ADA accessibility, for example. So again, well-intentioned ordinances, they're good, but sometimes that's why it's better to knock a building down than try to reuse it.
Yep. John Thomas.
Yeah, I think one of the things that may come out of the meeting is the approach that we use going forward. It would seem to me that perhaps a business group, that is Kirk and Jamie and some of the other organizations might want to take a look, as an example, at an existing ordinance and say what proposed changes should be considered in that ordinance. And you guys know which ordinances I'm talking about, and perhaps a comprehensive review outside of the municipal operation, and then come in with a proposal to modify it to address some of the concerns that we have based on COVID. Might be a way to try it. And I would suggest that you do it in Hampton. We're the largest community in the county, and see what the impact would be. And we have some areas that I think make sense. I can tell you this though, if you're going to go with some kind of a mixed use, you're going to have to deal with some of the costs that go along with having a mixed use. You can't tell people that we're going to have a pedestrian friendly area, but we're going to make you walk in the street. It's not going to work.
Right.
So the guys that say, well, gee, sidewalks are expensive. I know they're expensive, but if you're going to have that mixed use, you can't tell people that they can't get from property to property to property on a non-safe manner. Just, it's not going to get you anywhere. Anyhow.
Absolutely. We need, mixed use needs multimodal transportation opportunities, pedestrian, biking, etc. Kirk, final thoughts?
Sure. COVID's brought new challenges to our communities. New challenges arise all the time. So while COVID is unique in its scale and its impact, it's just another challenge that's coming down the pike. I think everyone involved, municipalities, private sector, needs to work together on these issues. I think sometimes there's a perception that, the private sector is coming in to make money and leave our communities. I've seen that on occasions, but I don't think it's the rule. I think we need to work together then to figure out what some of the solutions are and work together to implement them for the future.
Absolutely appreciate that, and appreciate the municipal officials' willingness to at least listen and try to come to a solution, working together. So appreciate everybody's involvement here. Just a heads up that we will be doing another session October the 3rd, 9 to 10 a.m. It is manufacturing week, and we're going to focus on our beverage manufacturers in Cumberland County, and excited to hear from our brewers and our distilleries and our wineries, and the impact that the economy has had on them, COVID has had on them. So with that, again, we're going to close out this session. Thank you for all the panelists. Thank you to the participants, and for those who are watching this afterwards, if you have any questions or wish to connect to any of the individuals that were on the panel, certainly John and Art, I'm sure, are willing, and John Thomas and Kirk were willing to speak with you, about issues you might be having, and listen to potential solutions that you have to offer. So again, thank you all. Appreciate your time, and have a great day, and enjoy Cumberland County.
Thank you.
Yeah.